Well, how can you possibly wrap your head around nothingness when all you've ever known is everythingness? And the brain dies and you die and everything disappears. So yeah, maybe that's true, but maybe it's something else.
Dr. Philip Cozzolino and his colleagues at the University of Virginia study past life memories in children, near-death and out-of-body experiences using one of the largest and most verified academic databases.
We have a database of about 2,254 of these cases over the decades that have been fully investigated. The most interesting one, I'll tell you this story, is a case of Burmese twins. This is in the 70s. Spontaneously, but almost simultaneously, started telling about having been Japanese brothers, not twins, but brothers, in World War II. And dying on a battlefield. And these two Burmese girl twins would talk to each other in Japanese, back and forth. And no one in the family in Burma knew Japanese. This must be a glitch, right? Like something's gone wrong. I mean, most of us are walking around not aware of a past life, and that's probably the way it's supposed to work.
What does it tell us about the nature of reality and consciousness?
I don't know. I think if you want me to speculate for a moment, you and I right now are inputs. We're learning, we're experiencing. So to me, that's fascinating that like consciousness potentially is so aware of itself that it knew it had to create a world of living and dying so that it could understand what truly living meant and that what humanness means. A number of past life memory children, a large percentage of them will say, oh, well, I chose my mommy. I chose to become her child. Consciousness is potentially fully autonomous. The gift of death awareness, the fact that we know we die as an animal on this planet is a gift. I'm going to put my money as a betting psychologist is that if you don't address that fear and that denial and that anxiety, it's going to be bad. I will have a better experience here if I incorporate the fact that I won't always be here.
Hello, Philip.
Hello.
Welcome. Welcome, and thank you very much for taking the time for this interview. Two topics keep on coming up in my conversations with other guests, which is death and reincarnation. And I think you are the perfect guest for both topics because both are your research interests. So who are you and why do you have such unusual research interests?
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Philip Cozzolino. I am currently a research associate professor at the School of Medicine at the University of Virginia in the Department of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences. I spent 20 years, I started here at the Division of Perceptual Studies in Virginia in January of 2024. But basically for 17 to 20 years before that, I was just a sort of what we call a mainstream psychologist. I got my PhD in psychology in 2006 from the University of Minnesota. And then I spent 17 years on the faculty at the University of Essex in England. And the bulk of my research over those 20 years was trying to make sense of the consequences, both good and bad, of human mortality awareness, right? What happens to us because and when we think about the fact that we're going to die, when it becomes aware to us, because of course we go through our daily lives, we don't necessarily think about it all that often, but something might come up, some little cue in the environment, a friend of ours might get ill and die, and suddenly we may face our own mortality a bit. And what are the positive and or negative consequences of that? Now, you asked an interesting question, which is how did I get to this point of being a researcher studying that, and then eventually the past year plus studying reincarnation, or at least potential reincarnation. It's a long story in the sense that in 1978, when I was 9 years old, I made my mother, I remember this, I made her take me to a movie theater to see a documentary that had just been released into mainstream cinemas called Beyond and Back. And this was only a few years after Raymond Moody even coined the term near-death experience. And it was a documentary sort of stepping through a series of cases of, documented near-death experiences. I don't know what 9-year-old asks their mother to say, I want to go see this documentary about near-death experiences. I'm sure there are others. I'm not that unique, but it's something that has been an interest of mine for a very long time. I went into a very different career. I kind of jokingly, being someone who studies apparent past life memories in children now, I say in a past life, I was a writer and producer in television. I had that career for 10 years in America before I went back to school and got my PhD in psychology. So I hadn't thought about it for a very long time. And then once I went back and got my PhD to become a psychologist, I discovered that there was a well-known dominant theory in psychology that talked about fears of death, anxiety of death, denial of death, our instinct to avoid it at all costs, and all of the often negative consequences that come from that. And I fell in love with this theory. It's a great idea, this thing called terror management theory. But I remembered the near-death experience literature. I had always kind of dipped my toe in it occasionally. You could find narratives online. So even when I was in television, I would still occasionally find myself reading near-death experiencers' accounts of their experience, and just being motivated by it, learning from it. And the takeaway from all of that was I remembered that there are a lot of, even though there are challenges that come with nearly dying and perhaps going to heaven and all these kinds of things, they aren't always just peaches and cream. They're sometimes very difficult. But the consequences for a lot of these individuals psychologically were quite positive. They eventually could take control of their lives in ways that human beings just generally don't. We're very routinized. We don't break out of bad patterns. We persist in jobs and relationships that aren't necessarily good for us. And when you look at the near-death experience literature and read these accounts, you see something very different. You see people who wake up and recalibrate and start over and quit jobs and, quit relationships. There are divorce rates that go up. They realize this isn't working for me. I don't know how I wound up here. I don't know why these are the choices I made, but I feel like now post near-death experience, I want to start anew. I want to re-identify in my life. I want to have control over it as opposed to just how I backed into this situation that I find myself in. And that was the point of that theory that I had found. It basically talked about all of the negative stuff that there isn't a lot of growth. It creates anxiety for us thinking about death. We fear it by default. We become defensive and biased because we turn to religion, we turn to culture, we turn to value systems, turn to politics, we turn to anything we can that can help us somehow make us feel better about the fact that we're going to die. But the problem with that is that all of those sources of help, whether it's religion or politics or nationalism or groups, culture, they become so incredibly important to us that if someone else comes along with a different culture, a different religion, a different set of beliefs, we become defensive about ours because they're helping us deal with our fear of death. Now, I know this is a very long answer, but what I took to that theory is I said, okay, this is brilliant. It's wonderful. I love it. I've never challenged terror management theory. It's a dominant theory in psychology. But what I knew at the time was that there were people who were confronting death truly in a near-death experience way, and they were having very different outcomes. They were reducing their fears of death. They weren't becoming defensive and biased about their previous beliefs and their previous worldviews. And what I did as a graduate student is I started incorporating that into my research, and I developed an experimental approach and a theoretical model that basically pits both of those potentials in a psychological model, that you can easily go down the path of terror management theory if you don't honestly confront your mortality, if you don't engage with it, if you don't integrate it as a reality into your everyday existence. You will be fearful and denying it, and it will lead to very potentially bad outcomes for you and for people around you. That's the potential. But if you do take it on, if you do confront it, honestly, consciously, if you integrate the fact that we are mortal and that no matter how much we don't like the fact that we're going to die, we are going to die. And if you can bring that reality into your regular thoughts about who you are and how you want to be, you can see some of the same effects in people who've never had a near-death experience, but it looks an awful lot like the people who did have a near-death experience. They start questioning why am I here? What am I doing? Is this relationship good for me? So that was my professional work for 20 years, was basically incorporating the lessons of near-death experiences into a psychological model to try to find a more hopeful, positive perspective on the fact that we have this awareness that we're going to die. And then I started working at DOPS, which is coming full circle, and my long answer here will end shortly. It's really beautiful for me because when I was a graduate student starting this idea, I started writing a paper that eventually did get published. It was when I was a grad student saying, hey, this great theory, terror management theory, may not be the only thing that we can learn about human mortality. There may be this other idea based on near-death experience research. It was only because I found the published scientific research from Dr. Bruce Grayson, who's now my colleague at Dobbs, that gave me the gravitas to go. I wasn't going to be able as a grad student and someone who had spent a career in television just suddenly saying, hey, you can find these narratives online. Look at how cool near-death experiences are. It was his work and Dr. Kenneth Ring, a researcher at Connecticut. Those were the two main people who were publishing peer-reviewed scientific medical journal articles about near-death experiences. And once I locked into those, it gave me the ability to make that point in that first paper. I was one of the first people to kind of bring near-death experiences into that mainstream psychological literature. And 20 years later, people are still using the idea. And for me, beautifully, beyond that, that's great. But it's just such a full circle career that now my colleague is Dr. Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia. He started my career in a way, and now I get to work with him.
Interesting story. Interesting that you started from the NDEs, right? So the positive effect, and then from there you moved to fear of death, which is rather negative overall impact on us, right? But recently I have even heard the hypothesis that fear of death underlies almost every problem in the world, starting from religious strife, excessive consumerism, wars, and even planetary destruction. So regarding fear of death research specifically, so what are your key findings? How common is this phenomenon? And does it vary across cultures, religions, or personal beliefs?
So yes, of course, there is always going to be individual and cultural, social level differences in this. We have to remember that a lot of modern psychological research, it falls into this category that perhaps, I don't know if others have talked about this notion called weird societies, WEIRD, Western, educated, rich, industrialized, democratic, right? And that's unfortunate. It's just the reality that we live in. It doesn't make it okay. And it's wonderful that we're having that conversation about needing to expand. If you want to understand human behavior, you need to get outside of weird societies and try to actually engage the planet. So a lot of this research, especially the terror management theory research, which has been around longer than my idea, most of it has been done in sort of that weird Western kind of white, rich, democratic parts of the world. But yes, your first point is valid. I mean, at least if you take the sociological, and certainly for me, the social psychological, that's my training is in social psychology. The literature shows very clearly that when people don't confront mortality in a healthy, honest, sort of conscious way, but you just sort of remind them in this sort of you're going to die, and you stoke up the fear of it. What happens is like I mentioned before, all those defensive, biased sort of motivations come to the forefront. And the very first paper that the terror management theorists wrote was actually about how fear of death predicts intergroup conflict and intergroup violence, right? And the notion being, if if I'm adhering to and needing my cultural worldview, my religion, my political system, if it's working for me in the way that I described earlier as this to manage, it's called terror management theory. It's a theory of how we manage our terror of death. So if all of those systems are in place, doing their jobs and making me capable of going out into the world, I'll be a good American, I'll be a good Christian, whatever it is that my worldview might be. I'll be a good father. I'll be a good mother. I'll be a good conservative. I'll be a good Democrat. And by living up to those expectations and standards, you get I feel better. I have self-esteem. That makes me, that allows me to move forward in the world. And it kind of helps us forget about the fact that someday we're going to die and be meaningless. Well, as soon as you run into someone else that says, yeah, well, your religion is BS, my religion is the right religion. Well, what am I supposed to do with that if that model is in play, if that's the way I'm going through the world? I mean, the one option is to just say, well, good for you, and I'm just going to continue living my life. We tend not to do that. We tend to say, oh my gosh, you are about to deflate this life preserver that I am holding on to desperately, and I need to save myself now. And the easiest way, according to this theory, is to take my life preserver, let's say, that I'm holding on to, so I don't drown in this fear pool of fear of death, is I'm going to start beating you to death with it, because my worldview has to win, so that I end up then being able to take a deep breath and say, okay, that feels better. Life has meaning again. And the fact that I'm going to die, I can kind of forget about that for now. And that threat that said my constructed worldview that was doing all this work for me is meaningless, is actually the one that's meaningless because I've beaten it down. And yeah, so papers show intergroup conflict. It shows greed. I've published papers showing how the terror management theory approach can predict greedy behavior. It can predict prejudice, stereotypes, aggression. It actually, there's a paper that's been published showing it predicts in the Middle East. It predicted during the time of the original Iraq War, so 2003-ish, 2004, that era. It predicted people in the Middle East saying, I wouldn't mind reading a pamphlet about putting on a suicide bomb vest. And in America, in that same study, it found it increased people's likelihood of saying, oh, it's okay if casualties that are innocent, like if there's collateral damage in a war, I'm more okay with that, after reminding them of their mortality in this way. So yeah, fear of death and the denial of it, and these processes that we engage in to sort of help ourselves feel better, these social constructions, the worldviews, it has really negative consequences for us because we put so much into that basket, or those baskets, those cultural worldviews, that anything that threatens them, we are, in a sense, existentially forced to defend and confront and become potentially confrontational about. Now, my theory, very briefly, my work, my research has shown that when you get people to think about death in a different way, and that's what my experimental manipulation did. They have an experimental manipulation in the lab that says boo, you're going to die. And I make in my design, I make them read about a death. I have them imagine actually a very real death. Imagine this is what's happening to you. It's about 300 words long. And then we ask them some questions after they imagine this very specific death. And 3 of the questions are linked directly to near-death experience accounts. And what we found is, comparing those 2 groups, people who went through a terror management experiment condition and then people who went through what I call a death reflection condition, they were significantly less greedy. Not only that, they were actually more pro-social. We have a paper in a journal called Psychological Science, where people on the street in England, after going through that manipulation and thinking about death in that way, were significantly more likely to want to donate blood that day than people who were in the other condition. We have other people have published research showing that it increases gratitude. Other people have published that it increases a sense of autonomy and authenticity in the person, that they start becoming a bit more aware of who they really are and what they really want in life. And what's really interesting is someone recently published a paper showing that my model and that way of thinking about death may actually predict better choices for the planet, more sustainable choices and decision making about how we live on this planet, if we can get people to think about death in a bit more of an honest, conscious, open, and less fearful way.
You know, I was thinking about death, and especially in the context of our society, right? And the West, obviously. So we have materialism and we have atheism as two prevailing metaphysical paradigms. So for us, life means stuff, people, events, and fun activities, for example, right? And death for us means oblivion, nothingness, and the end of everything. So I think there's no wonder really that no wonder that we live in fear of death. And we also know that our beliefs determine how we relate to each other and nature, as you were mentioning as well. And while I was preparing for this interview, I came across interesting research. So I was wondering if you could maybe comment on that. So when people are reminded of their mortality, so when they fill out a death anxiety questionnaire, what you're doing, right? It's your research, basically, your method. Or, for example, when the word death is flashed on the screen for less than 28 milliseconds,
Exactly.
which means that we are not even aware that we see anything. So then what happens, according to this research, is that Christians become more derogatory towards Jews. Jews become more hostile towards Muslims. Germans sit further away from Turkish people. That was peculiar. Americans become more physically aggressive towards other Americans who do not share their political beliefs. People intend to spend more money on clothing and entertainment. Yep. They yearn for higher status and luxury goods. They deny that they're animals and become more hostile, actually, towards animals, more willing to kill. They're also more willing to exploit natural resources like forests for personal gain. And they become more uncomfortable with their bodies and their basic biological functions. So there is a whole list afterwards.
Oh, yeah. Jamie Goldenberg. I know her work.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts of that? But before I let you answer, what surprised me actually is like, I can't imagine that if I'm answering the questionnaire with a bunch of kind of questions about my death, that it's not exactly enhancing my mood, to put it this way, right? So I can kind of understand it and can relate to that. But the fact that I get or there is a response from me, that type of response for something that I am not even aware of. So like this word death, which I cannot see for if it flashes for less than 28 milliseconds. So that was surprising for me. So I thought then this fear of death must be rooted really, really deeply somewhere in an unconscious, not on a kind of surface awareness level. What are your thoughts about that?
100%, 100%. It's also, I mean, I often refer to a lot of that work where because sometimes they do it, they don't always do it. In fact, the bulk of that research isn't subliminal. It's actually just two open-ended questions. The most common way of doing it is, what do you think happens to you when you die? And what are your fears and emotions when the thought of death arises? So it's just those two questions, and people answer them. And it's just enough to get them to think, oh my God, I didn't want to be thinking about death today. And that generates the fear. But some of the work has done that subliminal work. And I point a lot to that subliminal work when I was trying to build my model, because I was like, look, you don't even need people to know, right? And that is not what is happening with a near-death experiencer. They know, they believe they have died, right? We have medical records that they were dead on a table for 5 to 10 minutes. That's a uniquely, qualitatively different way of thinking about your death. So I love that research because it shows exactly the point of your question, is just how embedded this is in us. Now, I take the perspective of this as Now, it's more nuanced than this, as always, but just to kind of make the point, I often will, when I give a talk about this work, I will often just say, look, evolutionarily, it makes sense that we are this way, that the default mode, everything about us is geared towards survival. Everything in the human animal is about, I mean, in a healthy, normative human animal, it's about staying alive and doing everything you can to continue living and to avoid dying. And evolutionarily speaking, again, more nuanced than this, but it still makes my point. We come from stock that, would go out in groups to get food that they could eat and hunt things that were not necessarily predators, and they would go out and try and find food. And when suddenly you came across an unfamiliar dark cave, and from within the cave, you heard some really intense growling noises, you didn't, the reason you and I are here talking today is because our ancestors, evolutionarily speaking, didn't go, let's go in the cave, right? No, they backed up. They said, okay, I don't know what's in that cave. Let's try over there. There's no growling. There's no sort of scratching noises. Maybe we'll find something to eat over there. And that served us well. That's why we're here now, right? That we come from good, fearful stock. So it is just ingrained in us to avoid the scary cave, anything that's threatening to us. Now, the problem is that we are no longer in that, right? So that evolutionarily built sort of default mode of protection and defense and retreat is backfiring for us, psychologically, existentially speaking, because it just is our core response to any threat. If we can't, if we can't flee, we know that we fight, right? It's fight or flight. But if we can run, we're going to run. And that's the sort of core human response to things. And I think that's why my approach and my model has basically been saying, look, this isn't easy. This isn't the default mode. This is hard work. You have to fight through all that. You actually have to battle your innate desire to avoid thoughts of death at all costs. And you actually have to fight through that and then do more than that. You actually have to incorporate, you have to think about it, you have to process it, you have to understand on some degree of regularity that this moment right now is all you have and that tomorrow is not promised to you. And that you need to be thinking about the fact that this time on this planet, in this body, is limited. And the good news is if you fight through that, if you do that hard work, if you overcome that evolutionarily sound and built and helpful fear process, there are great benefits for you. Like I said, the research shows it just well-being, as broad as you can describe concept of psychological well-being, increases. Perhaps the sense of having a true coherent self, the sense of having meaning in life, self-esteem, all of these things increase. Your relationships get better. But it's hard work. It's just so much easier to just say, I don't want to think about that. Why would I want to confront that scary thing? Right? That's just, and in fact, like that literature shows, you don't even do that level of thinking about it. That's the point. It's so automatic. It's so rote that if anything comes up that says, boo, you're going to die someday, you're on to something else and you haven't even processed it. People sometimes go through those you don't, subliminally, they clearly don't even know. But even in the studies where they actually were asked the questions about death, they are not necessarily more aware. They're not sitting there saying, oh yeah, I was really thinking about death and I just decided I'm afraid of it and I didn't want to think about it. There's not that conscious level. It shows up, you're reminded of it at some deep core level. The fear process takes over, and those systems you have in place to manage that fear kick in. So your religion, your values, your political belief systems, your cultural nationalistic tendencies, whatever they may be, the things that you turn to for feeling better, they become active, and that's what you're aware of. Especially when someone next to you says, "Oh, I come from this other culture. We believe very differently." And now you don't even know why you're fighting with this person. You don't even understand that the reason you're fighting with this person is because you had earlier been exposed to a death prompt. But there you are fighting with that person. And that's, now why do we fear death? Yes, evolutionarily, I think that's part of it. It's just in our nature to be fearful and to run away from things that are threatening. But I also think it just makes kind of sense, right? I mean, when all you know is everything, when all you know is existing and feeling and thinking, the notion of potentially, I guess, remove the cosmologies that potentially promise and remove the near-death experience literature that suggests something else. But for so many people out there, they don't know those. They don't have those beliefs. So many people out there, dying is nothingness. Well, how can you possibly wrap your head around nothingness when all you've ever known is everythingness? So of course it's scary. I'm scared of dying. I mean, I do this research. I study near-death experiences. I do past life memory research. I have done this for 20 plus years of my life, and I don't want to die. Of course I don't. But I also still do believe that whether there's something better on the other side, which there very well may be, it doesn't matter that much because what I know is right here in front of me. And I have a very clear sense that I will have a better experience here if I incorporate the fact that I won't always be here into my regular thinking about being on this planet.
So what I'm hearing you say is that death for us is something that we actually suppress in our subconscious as bad news that we refuse to face in some ways, right?
Yep.
And I was thinking about how psychologists saw it, and Jung apparently saw this as a peculiar response by the unconscious. So he says, when the unconscious is apparently threatened with a complete end, it disregards it totally. On the other hand, according to Freud, it's in principle impossible to imagine our death, hence to face it. So he says, whenever we attempt to do so, we can perceive that we are in fact still present as spectators. So can we face our death? What are your views about that? Should we face our death?
Yes, I think we absolutely can, and I think we absolutely should. That is what I've spent the last couple decades working on, thinking about, writing about, speaking about, and teaching about. The notion that it isn't always pleasant, it isn't always easy. But when you look at the literature of near-death experience folks, when you look at the literature of people who have what I would call like the terminal patient literature, there's a whole bunch of parts. So it wasn't just the near-death experiencers. It was often lessons that I took from people who have been given that classic terminal, you have 9 months to live. And when you look at their accounts, their experiences, either self-generated or people studying people in that condition, there is just like with the near-death experiences, there's a complete recalibration. There is a complete openness and conscious awareness and acceptance now, obviously, because it's just finally, it is unavoidable, right? That's the point. The processes that exist almost automatically for us of denial and avoidance are the myth is shattered. They become so meta aware of what they were before. There's a famous quote, not a famous quote, but a favorite quote of mine it's in one of my papers. It was a doctor named Bill Bartholomew. He was an oncologist who had stage 4 cancer, and he was documenting his experience dying. And I write about him in a 2006 paper, quote him a bunch, and I often bring him back in whenever I talk to people about this. And he says a lot of the things I've been saying. That's why I'm not, I'm just parroting the stuff from the people who are actually the smart ones, the people who lived through this and learned on their own. He says this isn't easy work. It's really hard work, but you do get the payoff for the hard work when you just finally open yourself up to what we are and how much life there is that we are not fully living, because we spend so much of our time denying the fact that we're going to die and fearing the fact that we're going to die. And I just remember this one point. He just says, why didn't I know this before? Why didn't I learn this earlier? And I think that's the point. That's the everything I have for myself and for the work that I've done as a psychologist, I have tried to basically leverage those 2 points. You don't have to have a near-death experience. I don't want you to have a near-death experience, and I don't want you to have a terminal illness that opens you up. You don't have to. You could just shatter that, just like those realities shattered them for the near-death experiencers and for Bill Bartholomew. You can shatter your own. You can just stop pretending that death is scary and death isn't worth engaging. It's a biological reality. It's something. It's like I could pretend I have a beautiful head of hair. I could walk around delusionally talking to people about my height. I'm only 5'6". I could pretend I'm 6'3", but eventually people are going to say, this guy's delusional. What is wrong with him? That's not healthy. And it's no different. My unfortunate hairline, my unfortunate height, it's just as true and real as my unfortunate mortality. It's, and I think I'm a better person by just becoming, getting to grips with the fact that this is who I am. I'm kind of short and I'm bald and I'm going to die someday. That feels more authentic. That feels more like I'm on the right path to figuring out who I am and what I want. And if we can do that collectively, if we can do that across the board, then I feel like there are going to be fewer of those arguments, fewer of those aggressive moments, fewer of those intergroup conflict moments, and more of the individual actually taking care of themselves and living today, as opposed to worrying about what you're fearing in the future. I wrote once in a chapter on meaning, I wrote once, it's kind of annoying, I guess, for me to quote myself. I apologize, but it's still today, I think it's like where I'm at with this, which is that I ended that chapter by saying, I think the best definition of death is the absence of life. But the absence of death utterly fails to capture what it means to be alive. And in that context, when you think about it that way, that means life and living is actually the real mystery, right? That's the thing that's actually the challenge. And I just am one who believes that you're never really going to be able to dig into what that mystery is and what that challenge is if you don't first get rid of, confront, overcome your need to fear and deny death in your life.
But in my research, to be honest with you, I was thinking about the strategies for overcoming the fear of death. And what I saw seemed to be contradictory, really. So, for example, Jung advised not to think about death. So, of course, he also postulated that the psyche continues to exist after our physical death, as it is not confined to space and time, as he said. So to ensure the quality of life, he advised his later life patients, I quote, to live on, to look forward to the next day, to the great adventure ahead, as if life were to continue for centuries. So essentially, he says, don't think about death. Now, in contrast to that, Zen Buddhism suggests that we never should lose sight of our death. It even offers a practice in which an imaginary little bird is placed on each of our shoulders, and the bird is meant to be a constant reminder that this could be the last day of our life as we know it. So the purpose, of course, is not to scare us, but to prompt us to live our lives according to what is truly important. So if you thought this was your last day, you would probably not run out to buy a bigger car or some more clothes or get that career move going, right? So help us with the clarity here, because do you think there is a good general approach to dealing with the fear of death?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I want to be clear. I don't know that every single person needs to do these kinds of have these sorts of practices and incorporate them. I think there are people, I've met them, who really are, death isn't something, they're just not that afraid of it, and they don't necessarily think about it all that much. And they're happy. I've met them. What my point is to say, if you are the kind of person who absolutely cannot talk about it, cannot think about it, when the topic comes up, you need to leave the room. It makes the hair on your neck stand up, fears of death. If that's who you are, it's to some extent it's just kind of classic psychological exposure theory. It's just sort of like, look, you need to run toward this fear. You need to because this thing is powerful and it is doing stuff for you that you aren't aware of. The fact that you can just say, I'm going to leave the room and not think about it, you think you've done something, but you haven't. Underneath, the processes are kicking in, right? Your needs, your desires, your motivations that are driven by all of those worldviews that are comforting you and allowing you to forget about your intense fear of death. If you're that person, if you're in that state, my model is for you. My model is to say, look, it's not easy, but you got to try because there's too much evidence, right? As a researcher, all we really do is make predictions. We're not right all the time. It doesn't cut, and not everything we say is true for everyone. It's usually aggregated data, and here's what we learned, et cetera, et cetera. But where I'm going to put my money as a betting psychologist is that if you don't address that fear and that denial and that anxiety, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad for you personally. It's going to be bad for your relationships. It's going to be bad for you socially. And that's where I would put my money. And I would rather have someone actually say, okay, so tell me what to do. Well, I can't solve it for you. I can't give you a pill. I don't want to give you a pill. This is hard. The work is difficult. It is, but it's ours. It's our burden. I mean, the gift of death awareness, the fact that we know we die as an animal on this planet is a gift because it allows us to build and think and create and flourish and have families and jobs and careers, right? It's what actually, I would argue, does spark all of humanity being something more than animals in the field. But if at the end of the day, you are willing to let that natural sort of evolutionarily built process of fear, denial, anxiety to just do its work below this sort of your conscious awareness, you're going to wake up again, not everyone, but for my money's going to be on the fact that there's more chances than not that you're going to wake up someday at the age of 30, 40, 50 saying, how did I get here? Why am I in this relationship? Why do I have this job? Why am I so unhappy? Why am I so unsatisfied? I bought the new phone. I bought the bigger TV. I have the nicer car. Why am I still walking around feeling miserable? Why am I not feeling satisfied? Like I don't know who I am. I love Yalom. Urban Yalom is a great people existential psychotherapy. I highly recommend that book. Heidegger's work on some of this. I don't know all of the great thinkers on it. Ernest Becker, of course, he's responsible for terror management theory. Well, I mean, that's where the people who did that learned from him. So I do know some really good thinkers on this, and they're all incredible. But I often just turn to the modern day philosophers and poets, and those are people like, you know, Talking Heads, the band Talking Heads, the song Once in a Lifetime. How did I get here? This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful car. It's a song about backing into a point in your life where you wake up one day and go, I don't understand why I'm not happy. And my model in terror management theory makes sense of it because you just start listening to these external, hey, this will make you happy. Go do this. Go be this person. That's what, if you want to be a good Catholic, if you want to be a good Christian, if you want to be a good Jew, if you want to be a good American, if you want to be a good Brit, whatever the culture is that's satisfying your fears and denials, you have to live up to it. That's how you get a sense of meaning. But when all you're doing is following external obligations and duties and expectations, you wake up one day never truly satisfying yourself. You're not intrinsically satisfying. You're just still a hole there. You keep trying to fill it, but you're digging the hole every time you throw something in and you dig a little deeper. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I take the perspective, again, one more great poet, Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam once wrote in a song, I know I was born, I know that I'll die, the in-between is mine. And I feel like at the end of the day, I spent 20 years doing research and he wrote one line in a song and he kind of captured it all perfectly, which is, I need both of those things. I know I'm alive. I know I was born. I know that I'll die. But once you have those two endpoints, the in between is yours. It's up to you now. And giving yourself that agency as opposed to just looking for those external social solutions. Tell me what to do again. Tell me what to buy. Tell me who I'm supposed to, what should I think now? How should I behave? External cultural worldview. No, be an agent in your life. Make decisions. Be actively authentic in your life. I guarantee you the outcomes are better for you if you do that.
But then what I'm hearing you saying, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we or somebody has a suppressed fear of death, which is kind of sort of a secret program which running underneath, undermining your life, and you may not even be aware of that. So if you're suppressing that, it's better off if you bring it to the surface and actually face it. Yes. Right? That's what you're saying. But 100%. Then you're also saying that maybe we should not, like Buddhists suggest, I'm not saying it's a bad practice, but not maybe for everybody. We're not Buddhist monks. Maybe once you made peace with that, you can actually put it on the side and live your life, right? Yep. As you say, what you have in between your birth and your death. So both views are kind of applicable depending on the circumstance, I suppose. Am I correct?
Yes, that's exactly it. From my perspective, the saddest thing is, and it was true for me when I was deeper in, like, I used to, when I was a graduate, when I was an undergraduate many, many years ago, in another lifetime, I wouldn't wake up. The sun would be rising and I would still be in bed because I have never gotten to sleep because I couldn't wrap my head around what nothingness was. I couldn't figure out what it would mean to be dead. So my fear of death history is real, even though at 9 I was interested in near-death experiences. This has been this is complicated. This is multifaceted, this notion of mortality for human beings. It's real and it's scary. But I think when I look back on that and I think about the research I've done the past 20 years, what's so fascinating is it's just like Bill Bartholomew said. It's like what I'm learning now that I'm actually confronted with death, when I'm not able to run from it and don't want to run from it anymore, and I want to soak it in. I want to be this mortal being, is how much more alive I feel. Like everything tastes better. The way he puts it is that when you wake up, when you're told that you're not going to see spring, and then you wake up one day and it's spring. Spring isn't just the next season. It's a miracle. And what his point is, I believe, is that we need to see those miracles. We need to understand that spring is about to start. Don't just be happy that it's not cold anymore. Just see it for what it is. It's just a miracle that this happens, that this process occurs. There's death and there's life. It's true in the seasons. It's true in our cells. Life and death and all of this sort of cyclical process, it's a part of being alive. And if you're denying it, then what are you denying? You're denying being alive. You're denying living, right? If you don't want to engage in the fact that you're a mortal human being, then you're not being a fully human mortal being. And I just think that's what's so tragic is so many people think, as you said, I love that sort of underlying, it's like this code that's just running and it's doing that work. And they get up, they go to work, they have kids, they do things. I'm not judging anybody. It works. But I'm willing to bet that some percentage, some reasonably non-important 0% of those folks aren't truly living the fullest versions of themselves that they could be. They aren't having the spring is a miracle experience that they could potentially be having if they would be more engaged with what am I doing today because I don't know if tomorrow comes.
Do you have a fear of death these days, Philip? Or perhaps the nature of your research made a difference in this regard. When we were talking to cardiologist Dr. Pim van Lommel, he was doing a lot of research on NDEs. So he said that his research actually helped him to overcome fear of death. So he said, now I have about 10% left. So he even put a number to it. So
that's
what about
pretty good. I don't know if I could put a number to it. I do know like I just intimated, if I look at my trajectory of my lifetime, knowing some of the lows that I've been in terms of, like I said, literally not even able to go to sleep, because of my fear. And I think, to be clear, some of those nights, it wasn't like I was sitting there shaking in fear. It really was, I think, it was a cognitive exercise for me. It was just like, I don't understand. What could this mean if there isn't? I was raised Catholic, but at that point, I wasn't necessarily cosmology. I didn't have a cosmology that mattered to me at that point. So I was just trying to understand it, but yet it was anxious. It was an anxiety experience. So I'll put it in fear. But if I come from that to where I am now, no, I mean, I would definitely have reduced fear. I don't think, honestly, I don't know. I mean, clearly there will be people who will disagree with this, but I don't know that it's possible to truly have zero fear of death. Because even fear of death, you have to understand, like, that's a catch-all. But there is the people who study fear of death. Like, I study consequences of mortality awareness and death and anxiety and acceptance and all that stuff plays a part in it. But there are people who simply study fear of death, and it's multifaceted, right? Some people are just afraid of the dying process, right? That's scary. I don't want pain. I don't want, to lose my faculties. So I'm afraid of that, perhaps. I'm sort of personifying all the possible fears. There's a component of the way people think about fear of death that is not fear of death as much as it's fear of the dead. I don't want to be around sick people or dead bodies. I don't go to wakes, right? That kind of person. There are people who are afraid of their significant others dying. And that's what keeps them up at night, but not necessarily themselves, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I can't quantify what my fear of death is, because it's just more, I think that's the beauty of it in some interesting, strange way, is that it isn't, it is so robust. It is so it's everything. I mean, we are born terminal, right? And there's just no getting around that. We are all born dying, and it just is, when you're ready to address it, when you're ready to confront that, when you're ready to accept that, it's better for you. Does that mean you're never going to fear death? No, I wouldn't say that. My research doesn't suggest that. And again, I'm talking about weird people, and I mean, obviously a Buddhist monk living in there. I'm talking about what, unfortunately, that limited way of thinking about humanity. So I own that. But my general, in this modern Western world where we have all of these external messages coming to us that help that code work, right? They're there for us. We want an answer quickly. There it is for us. I don't have to do any deep thought. I don't have to do any introspection. It's just an answer is provided for me. I can buy that thing. I can look that way. I can lose that weight. I can try to find the right partner, and that will make me happy, and that will make me feel like I'm more alive, until it doesn't. And I think all I know is that I want to live feeling satisfied. I want to feel like I want to worry less about whether I fear death. I'm sorry for the long answer. I think that's what I want to answer that question is I don't care. I don't care if I fear death or not. I want to live life. I want to enjoy life. I want to be fully alive. I want to focus there. If that means my fear of death is reduced, okay. I don't even care if it does or not. As long as I feel that what I'm doing here and what you're doing here on this planet in this moment, that's what I care about.
Thank you for that answer. I didn't expect it. I expected percentage. No, I'm just kidding.
I didn't either.
Right. But if we look at the other extreme, so when people are totally obsessed with death and everything related to death, there are even cults of death. Yeah. Wouldn't then fear of death be in reality then a fear of life? So a sort of a form of escapism, if you like. What do you say to that?
Yeah, and in fact, that's a part of the terror management theory that I talked about earlier, then some of Ernest Becker's writing as well, that helped the terror management theorists build their model, talks a lot about how human beings, one way they deal with these issues is they try to find ways to numb themselves, to be distracted, to be whatever it could be. It could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be sex, it could be TV, it could be purchasing, materialistic sort of existing in the world. And all of these things are simply just attempts to, I think at the end of the day, even though they feel like it's you being alive, it's you living, it really is actually sort of reducing your sort of to me it demonstrates that you actually don't want to live. You don't want to live. You don't want to be alive because I think about that. That's sort of the point that we were talking about earlier, the biological sort of physical animalistic things like this researcher, Jamie Goldenberg. She has shown that you don't even have to get people to think about death, right? You don't have to even do the 28 milliseconds. You don't have to do the manipulation that I talked about earlier. The two things that terror management theorists do? All you have to do is get people to think about sex and sex and the parts of sex that are a little bit more, like, if you're doing it right, sometimes there are odors, sometimes there are, bodily fluids, and you get people thinking about that, and suddenly you find that condition compared to other people in a different control condition are behaving just like the people who went through the fear of death manipulation of terror management theory. Why? Because reminding people of our animality, the fact that we have juices in us and that we have smells and that we are not pristine, divine creatures reminds us that we are dying, right? So anything that makes that's the difficulty about this, right? Is that I'm talking about trying to get you to be fully alive. I want to be fully alive. My model is about dig into life, own it. At the same time that you do that, you have to constantly be overcoming the fact that being fully alive reminds you constantly of you're going to be fully dead someday, right? So it is this interesting sort of conundrum that we face. But I just feel like being afraid to be alive is akin to fear of death, and maybe worse. I mean, maybe it is, right? I mean, if you're not engaging in your life, even again, none of this would be so front of mind that someone would say, "This is why I'm not fully living," is because it reminds me that I'm an animal and not a divine creature. That's not. This is, this is the assumption. This is the theoretical assumption we're making. Um, I feel like that is just more sad than someone who walks around afraid of, willing to admit they are afraid of dying, but yet somehow may still find a way forward and existing in the world. There are people out there who aren't thinking about death at all, but they're not fully living either. So I know that's different from a death cult and these kinds of things that you mentioned before. But yeah, I think that's the beauty of that work that Goldenberg and others have done is that tension that humans face between wanting to be, literally, it's like there's a continuum, animality on the one end, divinity on the other. And we're always trying to imagine that we're closer to this divine being and creature because, I mean, first of all, it's great to feel that you are that way, but also it serves this other clear purpose, which is, aha, if I am divine, then I am more than mortal. I am more than a mortal animal on this planet. Maybe we are divine. I'm not saying we're not, but all I know is that in this moment in time, on this physical, sort of in this physical reality that we face, we are a physical living thing that's going to die someday. Now, divinity may come downstream for us. I don't know. But we have to confront the fact that someday we're going to get ill and someday we're not going to get better.
I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with either or. I would say and.
With animality or divinity.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, I think the middle of the balance. The balance is where you always want to be.
In the middle.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Balance is good.
But what if we had a high degree of certainty that death is not the end? Mm-hmm. Would that change our fear of death for the better? So you mentioned DOPS. So you worked at Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. Mm-hmm. And DOPS has a large body of empirical research on children with past life memories. So how reliable and verifiable are reincarnation-like cases and phenomena as such?
Well, a number of them are verifiable in the sense of a child. So for those who don't know, this work started in the 1960s by Dr. Ian Stevenson, the chair of the psychiatry department at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. And he had this interest and he started following cases that he was told about these young children, usually between the ages of 2 and 5, 2, 4, 5, that started spontaneously telling stories, if you will, just basically appearing to express memories of having once lived previously. Many of them will explain how they died. They'll talk about jobs they had. They'll talk about family, even name people. And when I say they're verifiable, we have a database at DOPS of about 2,254 of these cases over the decades that have been fully investigated. Others, many more cases have come to us that haven't been fully investigated. And 70% of those cases, of that 2,254, 70% of them have been verified in the sense of actually being able to identify a previous person who seems to fit the story that the child is talking about. And only about 20% ish of those are actually within the same family, right? So like maybe a child saying, I was once my great grandfather or great grandmother, right? A lot of people will say, well, isn't it just people saying they're all in the same family? Well, no, the bulk of the people that they claim to actually not be, most of them are not claiming to be from the same family. And that to some extent, that's remarkable, especially given if you go back decades before the internet, right? This was, like I said, been going on the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s, many of these cases, where it would just have been impossible for a family back then to have known some of the things that have actually come out of this child. There was no internet to find this information. And some of the details that these children come up with are stunning. I mean, they'll name names, literally full names, first and last names. And then it turns out people will find that person who either was killed the way the boy or the girl said they once died, or was the friend that they said they once had who saw them, who was at their death. Oftentimes, one of the things that's most fascinating, Ian Stevenson wrote 2 full volumes, very thick volumes on this, is there are 10% of our cases, we have been able to verify that there are birthmarks that the children are born with that map on perfectly via like post-mortem reports in autopsy reports how that person, the previous person, died. So there's a picture in our library where I work of a boy that has on the back of his head right around here this straight mark. And it's a birthmark, and it's just, there's no hair there. It's just this scar. And he, as a young boy, would tell the story of having been killed by an axe to the back of his head. And enough detail came in from his expressed apparent memories that Ian was able to go to this other part of the world where he was able to track down the previous person that mapped onto this young person's stories and discover that, in fact, he had been killed by an axe hit to the head and right where the mark was on the little boy. And again, this was at a time in a part of the world, I think this was in India in the early 1970s. There's just no internet available to have found that information. And I don't even know if you can find that information today, frankly.
Sorry,
I don't know that.
But he was born with that? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
or it appeared, because you
No,
say when
no,
you say scar, it's almost...
They're born
Yeah,
with it.
it implies that some physical thing was going on at some point, but you say
Yes.
he was born with it.
In fact, the 2 volumes that Ian Stevenson wrote are called Biology and Reincarnation. It could be reincarnation and biology, but those are the 2 words. He was saying, like, I can't he never explicitly, I mean, he ended his career saying, don't take away that I feel like I have the answer. I'm still seeking. But he has documented numerous cases. We have numerous cases of children born with birthmarks or defects. We have pictures in our library of kids born missing an entire set of fingers. And sure enough, they were able to determine that the previous person that linked to their apparent memories had their hands and their fingers cut off. So there does the potential. Again, I want to be very clear, speaking for myself, but also for us at DOTS. We don't know, right? No one is clearly saying this is evidence of reincarnation. What we're comfortable saying at DOPS is we're open to all interpretations at this point. We're not the kinds of scientists or researchers. We're well trained. We have people with PhDs from University of Pennsylvania, and they worked at Johns Hopkins, another one of ours. I was trained at the University of Minnesota. We know what we're doing as researchers and scientists. We're just willing to accept that we might not know everything and that there are potential answers out there that do in fact challenge the physicalist, materialistic view of that many scientists have, which is that everything is physical. Every bit of consciousness is an illusion generated by neurons and dendrites in the brain, and none of it's anything more than that. And the brain dies and you die and everything disappears. And we are simply willing to accept that, yeah, maybe that's true, but maybe it's something else. Maybe consciousness is something. Maybe it is an entity all its own. Maybe it is more fundamental than that. And we are engaged in trying to understand these things. Now, the past life memory research, I don't know. It could be something other than reincarnation, right? The people should look this up. I mean, we could talk about it. Their cases are remarkable, the things these kids say. I mean, they're young kids who are just coming out saying things, naming names, naming places at times, sometimes not as specific, but oftentimes very specific things that can be verified. Maybe it's not reincarnation. Maybe it's something remarkable, like some sort of psychic thing. Maybe they have access to information that others don't have for whatever reason at that point in their life, right? Maybe it's completely coincidence. Maybe it's fraud. Maybe it's all kinds of potentials. I think we have to be open to all of that. But maybe it's evidence of a past life too. The fact that the birthmarks transfer, I think that was one of the things that Ian, I think that's why you write two thick volumes, like I've been saying. I think that's really compelling. I think that's one of those things that you just can't wrap your head around, how this child comes out in one country with this birthmark or birth defect, saying something that leads an investigator to find that person who once lived and died in exactly the way the child said. And there's the postmortem report showing that, yes, in fact, we have kids with birthmarks that look like bullet holes. Sure enough, autopsy reports showing that's where the bullets hit in the previous personality that when they died. It's compelling. It really is. Don't know what else to make of it.
Yeah, I was watching an interview with with two families who had this experience with their kids. Both are in the U.S. And what I found, because I was trying to make sense of it, as you said, could it be a hallucination? Could it be maybe, I don't know, a personality disorder of some kind, schizophrenia perhaps? But then it's so specific. You can't call it hallucination because it's awfully specific, and on top of it, it matches a story of another person, right, of life and death of another person. But what worse, I found, is that these kids are reliving the terror of that death over and over and over, and have nightmares and you know, and of course it's a nightmare also for parents. You know, if a child says, "You're not my real mommy," you know, my real mommy lives the next state, and I was killed in a Oklahoma bombing, you know, or something like that. And they don't know how to deal with it. So I was watching that, and I was just thinking, do you have a hypothesis then? And that's the first question. And second question, how do mainstream science explain these cases, or do they just ignore it?
Yeah, they tend to ignore it. They tend to just fall back on, well, that's pseudoscience, which I don't think they quite know what that even means. Because if you know what pseudoscience is, it's not the way we work. It is mostly ignored. At the same time, Ian Stevenson actually got people, like, he had the Journal of American Medical, JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, actually referred to his work on this. And basically, there's a famous quote. I could find it for you right now. I don't have it off the top of my head. But in that JAMA article years ago, they basically said, you cannot fault Dr. Stevenson's approach and his rigor of how he has investigated these cases. So it's a hit or miss, right? Generally speaking, people aren't really aware of it. And if they are, they just kind of poo-poo it and say, well, that's kind of silly. But I think from my perspective, the way I look at those folks is that, that's just not the way science works. Science isn't supposed to be religion. It isn't supposed to be that you know the answer. right? And again, I'm not criticizing religion. I'm just saying religion is here is what I know to be true. And if you want to be a part of this religion, you need to believe that this is what's true. So when a scientist says, well, I know that can't be true, you just think, well, wait, that's not how scientists are supposed to work. I mean, we're supposed to work with there are clear observations. There's some phenomena or phenomenon in the world, and it's recurring. It may not be 50% of the children in the world, but it's a non-zero number of the children have these experiences and are saying these things. And as you said, from our perspective, sometimes some of the most meaningful reasons that motivate us, some of the most meaningful motivation for us is these parents. I mean, my first paper it's actually going to impress, my first paper at DOPS about the past life memory research is now going to be, it's been peer reviewed and it's been accepted in a journal. It's all about parents because to me, I'm not a parent, but I walked into this and I started learning all about the research about almost 2 years ago now. And this is the first thing I thought. I was like, this has got to be so difficult. I mean, you've got a 3-year-old, 4-year-old having nightmares in bed about dying in a fire or a plane crash, and they're saying these things, and and no one will listen to you, right? Like you can't go to your neighbors, you can't go to your doctors, you can't go to your priest and say, I think my kid's claiming he was once alive before. So you're on an island all to your own, and you just have this little child, and you don't know what to do about it. And to me, that was just so important that we dig into this and be like, no matter what it is, if it's reincarnation, if it's some sort of interesting super psi is the term people use that I talked about before, awareness, if it's chance, if it's anything else that is explainable, that isn't supernatural or paranormal, great. I don't care. I want you to know that there's a place that you can talk to somebody, right? That actually we don't think you're delusional for saying what's happening with my child. I try to ignore it. That's often what they do. They try to ignore it, but eventually when a young kid really develops these memories and they keep coming out, it's almost impossible to ignore. And they are qualitatively different. Like I'll just go off a little bit of a tangent here because people sometimes, I want to make it clear, like we've been very clear. I've spent 20 years of my life studying death and human awareness of death. And one of the things you learn in that process is when, as a human being, do you start asking and thinking about and contemplating death, right? And generally speaking, at around the age of 4 to 7, kids will start like, wait, what? Where's grandma again? And when will I get to see her again? And why doesn't she come around anymore? Like they start asking questions about death in ways that, as you can imagine, it's confusing. It doesn't make sense to them. That is qualitatively different than a 2.5-year-old, 3-year-old walking up to their parents and saying, you know, when I died in that plane crash, or when I died in that swimming pool, right? It's like, it is qualitatively different. Again, not suggesting, or at least open to the potential that it's reincarnation, but not even needing it. It's just, you have to understand that is just uniquely different. Same thing that you mentioned before. We've all probably did it when we were kids, and we've all had that classic image of a child who's mad at their parent, their mother, saying, I hate you, I want a new mommy, right? I want a new mommy. Qualitatively different than a child calmly walking up to their parents saying, you know, you're not my first mommy. Not angry, not necessarily demanding that they're not their mommy, they won't anymore. It's just that is uniquely different. So whatever this is, whatever this children expressing what appear to be past life memories is, I hope we're on a path to figuring that out. But more than that, we're really still just trying to normalize it. We're publishing more and more in mainstream non-parapsychology journals about it, and just making people. We're running a study right now. We're working with the University of Chicago, the NORC, the National Opinion Research Council or Center, and we're doing a prevalence study. We're going to have 1,000 mothers we're focused on America, unfortunately for this one, but we're going to have 1,000 mothers fill out a questionnaire with all kinds of clues for us, cues that we would look to without necessarily asking them right off the bat about past life memories, but just, has your child ever said something like this? Has your child ever behaved in this particular manner? And we're going to try to develop a sense of like, okay, what percentage of mothers and fathers might actually encounter this, right? It's been studied for 60 plus years, and no one actually knows the answer to that question. We know it's not zero. It just, we don't know. We want to come up with an estimate of what it is as we try to figure out what's actually happening.
I also heard that kids being ostracized at school, so they try to tell the story because they have to tell somebody. Often parents tend to ignore or don't believe, so
Yeah.
they go and try to do it at school, and at school then they get ostracized and isolated, so they're called freaks, and so it's
Yeah.
it's a
Let me tell you
drama.
this. Let me tell you this very quickly. I think it's important for people to hear this because one of the first things that skeptics will say about this is because some parents have, like one of the most famous cases in the American cases is this kid named James Leiniger. He's now a teenager, but his case is well documented. Jim Tucker, my former colleague, was the investigator. He wrote a book about it. James Leiniger's father wrote a book, published a book, and sold his own copies. So people do this, and that's what the skeptics will say. Is they'll say, "Well, aren't these parents just ginning this up for attention because they want to be on documentaries, they want to be on these podcasts that present all this as real, it validates their beliefs and makes them money." And again, I'm not saying that that has never happened, but this paper I just talked about that just got accepted about the parents, one of the key findings from that paper, I went through the entire database, 60 plus years, 2,254 cases. And what I found was, I think, so interesting, which is we have this variable in the data set that's called the strength of case score. And without getting too into the weeds, the strength of case score combines a whole bunch of factors and features of the investigation into one number. And the way we put it is that the higher that number, the stronger the case, the more likely it is that the best explanation for this case is an anomalous one, right? So that's a very cautious way of, let's just for now cut through the BS and just for a moment, the stronger the case, maybe it's reincarnation, right? It's like that's kind of the paraphrase. It's like I don't know what else to say. It's like we can't. There's too many of these features that we can't explain. Too many verifiable factors. Too many things that tell us that there may not be a natural explanation for this. And what I found was the stronger the case on aggregate through the whole database for the 60 plus years of this, the more likely parents were to actively be suppressing the child, to be saying, stop it. Even one of the versions of suppression in our database is corporal punishment, literally spanking them. So if it's true that all of this is just parents looking for attention because they want to write books and be in documentaries, you wouldn't find 60 years of this where the strongest, because that's where the book is. That's where the documentary will be really interesting. A strong case. The stronger the case, the closer you're going to get coverage for that. Well, no, huge effect. As the case got stronger, parents became more and more desirous of their kid to just stop talking. Just please. Why? Because of all the things that we've kind of already talked about. It's usually a strong case and a more likely to be an anomalous case. It's got a lot of emotion, a lot of distressing, a lot of death, how this kid died. And parents get freaked out, like, what is wrong with my kid? And I don't want, everyone's making, we can't talk about. So again, I'm not saying there isn't one or two, it hasn't happened on occasion, but I just found that to be a remarkable finding that it's just not what people think. These kids, to your point earlier about the specificity, one of the famous American cases that Jim Tucker investigated, a kid named Ryan Hammonds, he seemed to be, we identified his past personality as this person named Marty Martin, who was a sort of once a small extra kind of actor in black and white movies, who eventually started his own agency of actors and talent agency. He died a natural death, generally speaking, as an older person. Marty Martin did. And Hammonds actually kept saying that he died at a particular age. I'll make it up right now. I don't remember the exact age. Let's say he kept saying he was 79. And all the records, and even Marty Martin's family kept saying, because they were part of the process, saying, no, he died at 77. He was 77, so they got that wrong. Ryan Hammonds got that wrong. Well after this case had been investigated, it was uncovered from official documents in Los Angeles that, in fact, I believe it was in Los Angeles, he had actually died at the age of 79. And even the family didn't. I think it was a classic kind of one of those things where early actors and performers may have tried to make themselves younger than they. So even just by a couple years, it can help, right? Like as you're trying to get work as an actor, as a performer. So I literally, the family was like, we had no idea. And here's this young kid at the age of 2, 3, 4, from the very early saying, I died at 79, I died at 79. And everyone's saying, no, you're wrong. He was 77. And years later, it turns out, no, in fact, he was the only one that was right. It's remarkable. It just is, especially in the context. I mean, one little thing like that. But if you look at that Ryan Hammond's case, there are just dozens of statements. He named the street basically that Marty Martin lived on. He talked about having been on a performer, a dancer, like in vaudeville, and that was true. It's just, yeah, some of this stuff, it's just so specific. It isn't, people, if they think that they're just saying vague things that then people sort of collapse down into something, no, they come out with just straight out names. They come out with ages. They come out with occupations. It's interesting.
I don't know if reincarnation is real or not, or rebirth, some people say, because reincarnation implies that there is a single personality which keeps on coming back, right, in different bodies. But if rebirth is true, I think there is a good reason not to remember your past lives.
Right. I've said that before. I've actually said whatever's happening with these kids, let's for a second assume reincarnation is real or some kind of, reincarnation, rebirth, whatever you want to call it. This must be a glitch, right? Like something's gone wrong. I mean, because presumably it should work in a way that I don't like. What? Let's assume it's happened to all of us. Well, the most of us are walking around not aware of a past life, and that's probably the way it's supposed to work. It's a weird thing to say, but you would think it would have a structure to it, right? Like that consciousness starts a new life, and the old one goes away. So, what is interesting, and one of the things, sorry for going so long on this. One of the things that we find is that of our cases, 68% of them, of these children who talk about dying, 68% of them, so about 70% of the kids will talk about how they died, but 68% of how they died will say they died violently, traumatically, unnaturally. So there is a part of me that thinks that maybe there's some, again, it doesn't, because it's seemingly true even for those who can remember a natural death, but there's got to be, it feels to me like maybe the violent traumatic part of that, maybe that creates this glitch, maybe that enhances the glitch in some way and brings these things to the forefront. Maybe with these kids, maybe they're special kids, maybe they have exceptional memories just for their age. Maybe there's something in their new body that makes them more capable of finding these memories in some way, whether that, if again, let's for a moment assume that that's what they are, actual memories. And we're moving to that direction. My colleague and I, Marietta Pelavanova, we just received a total, we put out a grant proposal and we've received $750,000 for a 2-year grant research project, which in the grand scheme of like mainstream research, $750,000 isn't all that much money when you're talking about people get 3.8 million or this kind of from the NIH. But for our kind of work, doing this kind of work, $750,000 is kind of unprecedented. And our whole focus is going to be bringing kids into the lab, having EEG and other neuroimaging techniques, comparing these court kids, that's what we call them, cases of the reincarnation type, CORT, C-O-R-T. And we're going to compare them to similar non-court kids, and we're going to test them for trauma effects. We're going to test them for memory capabilities, and we're going to try to understand, why is it these kids? Why do they have these memories? Again, whether it's reincarnation or not, they're clearly having this experience. So is there something unique about them compared to similar kids who aren't having those memories? And I think that'll be really helpful. I think there's been a lot of evidence collected, like we've been talking about, Ryan Hammond's, James Leininger, all these 2,200 cases. It's just an evidence approach. Look, it exists. These kids exist. We're trying to move to a process. What's happening? Why do these kids have these apparent memories? So wish us luck.
Interesting. Congratulations on the grant. And
I'm
really pleased to hear that you're going to continue with the research. But I was wondering, Has anyone done that before? Like looked at the images and looking for correlates of some type between, this type of memories and what's happening? Well, what body tells us or what our brain tells us about.
Yeah, not yet. People have done other things besides the evidence approach. They have done testing, like more behavioral testing of intelligence and verbal skills, with just, sort of standard assessments for children. And we're leveraging some of that learning as well, because these are uniquely different kids. They don't just talk uniquely different, but they are. The evidence is multiple studies show they are generally significantly more intelligent than children their age who aren't having those memories. They have significantly better verbal abilities. So we're hoping now, this is truly not trying to be boastful. It is a first of its kind in this sort of cases of the reincarnation type, the past life memories studies, to try to dig in, to use these modern mainstream scientific sort of neuroscientific approaches. I mean, we're using scientific approaches even when we do the investigation, but to take it to this next level with comparison, control kids. We're going to do, if we can, we're going to try and do some fMRI work as well with the children. But the nice thing is we have EEG and we have this other technique called FNIRS. It's near infrared spectroscopy. It's kind of it's akin to MRI imaging. It's different from EEG. So across all of that, and behavioral assessments, just like before. We're going to look at memory in a behavioral task. We're going to look at trauma reactions in behavioral tasks, eye tracking, et cetera. We have a whole plan, and what's really powerful for me about it is, it's back to a point I made earlier. Regardless of what happens or what it points to, by taking it to this next level, by using these approaches and these techniques, we should be able to publish a number of these findings and these papers in non-parapsychological journals. We should be able to publish in neuroscientific journals, develop cognitive neuroscience, so developmental neuroscience journals. And I think that'll be really important for this work, so that more people get exposed to it. And we will probably have to be very cautious and careful, which is sort of our way anyway, in the language and the phrases we use and the way we frame it all. But I think that'll be really helpful for this. Again, getting back to that normalizing it. This is a thing. Whether you know about it or not, it's a thing. And now maybe we can know a little bit more about it using techniques that you would expect us to use and have never been used before. So I think that's a really good thing too.
I think that's great, because if at least we manage to get the mainstream science to acknowledge that there is a valid phenomena going on.
Exactly.
Okay, whether we know why and how and the rest of it, that's a next step. But science should be open-minded enough, right? That's the purpose of science, to explain unknown phenomena and not just ignore them because they don't fit into the paradigm. I think
either ignore it or assume you already know the answer to it when you haven't done it.
Therefore,
right?
I'm not gonna look.
Right, because it can't be anything like that.
Right,
why are you doing it? Exactly. Well, because that's what science does. I don't. What do you mean? Why am I doing it?
I have a hypothesis. It's a personal thing, really. But when you mentioned that these kids who are coming back with the memories from previous past lives, I was thinking, if reincarnation model, explanatory model of reality, is correct, is correct and right and valid, then I think that our talents appear in a completely different light. I know you're also a musician, so I'm a musician myself. So there are things where when I start doing, it feels so familiar. It feels so natural. It's like when you're doing a painting, it's like you've done part of the painting, you come back next day and you pick up where you left off. So that was for me with music and some other things like dancing and stuff like that. It's just in your body, it feels natural. like I've done it, like I know it, I feel it, it's. And then people say, "Oh, yeah, it's a talent. You have a talent."
It's a talent, right? It's just you have this skill, you have this talent. We're working with a colleague in Canada, Dr. Raphael Tedeschi, I believe is his last name. I can't remember. I should get it correct. I'm sorry. He's doing a proposal. He's working on the whole talent prodigy perspective as potentially having some connection to this sort of transfer, if you will, just like what you're describing. We just recently, Marietta and myself, we just started, we're going to be publishing a new paper. We're starting to write it. I just did the analyses yesterday, actually, of phobias that we're able to actually differentiate in our data set of those 2,254. There are kids who told these stories who have, as you can imagine, phobias of water because they believe they drowned once. And in fact, we verified again that, yes, that's true. But then there are other kids in the database who are telling stories of a past life who have phobias, but the phobias are not at all linked to the past life, which happens. Kids have phobias, right? I mean, they just do. And what we found, I literally just ran this data yesterday and the day before. The kids in our database who have phobias tied directly to their past life memories are on a series of variables qualitatively different from the kids in the database who have natural phobias, if you will. So there is it's everything we've been talking about, the talent, the phobias, birthmarks. I have a paper under review right now where we only have 40. I know that doesn't sound like a lot when you're talking about 2,200 cases, but 40 cases of kids who apparently experience what's known as xenoglossy. Xenoglossy, if you don't know, is that phenomenon when someone starts speaking a foreign language that they shouldn't be able to speak. They have no apparent natural explanation for it, but they're suddenly speaking that language. Well, there are 40
Cool.
cases. Yeah, there are
Cool.
40
We have
cases
to
in our
learn.
databases. Yeah, there are 40 kids who, in different degrees, I mean, the stories are interesting. In some cases, they're really simple. But I was able to document all. I pulled the original case files, and I could see why they had been coded as yes, xenoglossy. And of course, as you can imagine, these are kids saying they had lived in a foreign country and died in a foreign country in the past life. And I was able to show in that paper that just like the birthmarks, the best predictor of what made those 40 cases have apparently been, at least someone said that they spoke this foreign language. The best predictor was the experience of violent traumatic death and intense emotions around their past life memories. So again, it's this traumatic sort of kicks, sort of glitch. I don't know, however you want, but whether it's birthmarks, whether it's language, whether it's phobias, whether it's even talents or skills, there does seem to be some unbelievably interesting connection that transfers potentially into this new existence. Again, that's for the moment, assuming as we sometimes refer to it, adopts the R word. If for a moment, if you play the reincarnation sort of hypothesis game, gosh, that's pretty powerful that it's potentially not just a consciousness sort of reincarnating, but that it potentially could transfer some of that biology, psychology with it. That's powerful.
And out of curiosity, were the cases where kids were speaking those foreign languages consciously? I mean, like a language, and not just like knowing what it means, really, with grammar and everything.
It goes all the way from so again, it's definitely foreign language. There's a term. This is xenoglossy. There's a term called glossolalia, and glossolalia is speaking in tongues, right? So that's just utterances. This is always language, so foreign language. Now, in some of the cases, it's incredibly mundane. The reports are a grandmother saying, I walked into the room and the kid was pointing up at the counter saying the Hawaiian word for candy. And I only knew it because my grandmother spoke native Hawaiian and no one in the house did. And he was only a 2-year-old. So how is my grandchild know that word? But on the other extreme, there are stories. Again, I don't have video. Go back to 60s, 70s, 80s. I have the in-depth interview that Ian Stevenson did, and I can look through it. Even the linguists, he brought linguists in to talk to some of these parents and the kids. The most interesting one, I'll tell you this story, is a case of Burmese twins. This is in the 70s. So these are Burmese girl twins who both told spontaneously, but almost simultaneously started telling about having been Japanese brothers, not twins, but brothers in World War II, and dying on a battlefield. They were in the same platoon and died at the same time on the same battlefield. And these two Burmese girl twins would talk to each other in Japanese back and forth. And no one in the family in Burma knew Japanese. And in fact, the story, like I said, it's all in this case file. There are neighbors and other family members who would say not only did they do that, but it took them significantly longer to learn Burmese than their siblings and their friends. And years later, when they would walk down the street talking in Burmese, strangers would say, "Where are these kids originally from?" Because it sounds like they're speaking Burmese with a foreign dialect, like a foreign accent. So again, all I could do is see what was in the documentation from the investigation. I wasn't there. I don't have video or audio of it, but all I have are Ian's notes and all of these extra sources, again, linguists and neighbors and family members. So what to me, though, the whole point of my paper, really, just to wrap this up about what I'm trying to be cautious about here is that the way I approached the paper was, if it was chance, if it was fraud, if it was misinterpretation, right? Or if it was the kid was speaking Japanese or said the word candy in Hawaiian, but you all forgot that they had been exposed to in some way to some language and you just didn't remember that, whatever it is. Well, then over 60 years, these 40 cases ought to exist randomly in the data set, right? They should just have occurred occasionally at times. And yet when I approached it from, we're working with this new sort of model that we're working with, Marietta and myself taking over for Jim Tucker, that emotion trauma is one of these core pathways that seems to generate these past life memories. That's one of two pathways we're studying. Well, my emotion trauma variables are the only things that significantly predicted that group of 40 kids speaking and having that experience. So again, I'm not saying it's reincarnation. I'm not saying it's absolutely they all spoke the foreign language magically somehow because of reincarnation. What I'm saying is there are 40 cases coded that way. We have a prediction as to what might be accounting for some of these cases. And if it is purely natural and purely random, then it shouldn't be systematically predictable. And it was. And it's specifically by the thing that we assumed and we have been working with as our leading hypothesis, emotion trauma. So it's just one of these things where we're just going to keep moving forward. We're not making claims. We're just doing research, analyzing data, asking questions, and we're hoping that downstream more answers will come.
Oh, interesting story. I mean, imagine the odds of it, if it's true. Two brothers died at the same time and got reborn as twins.
I know. It's remarkable.
It's cool. This is super
I know.
cool, really.
It's remarkable.
You have really cool research, Philip.
It's funny. There are times where, and I'm not joking about this, like literally once, sometimes more than once a week, I'll say to one of my colleagues or one of my colleagues will say to me, "We have weird, cool jobs." It's like, it's remarkable. I spent, like I said, 20 years in mainstream psychology and I enjoyed it. It was great. But this past, I've now been at DOPS officially for 13, 14 months. And it's been the most exciting, interesting, engaging part of my career ever.
I'm curious though, if we look at the cultures where reincarnation, because that's the typical word which is used, is sort of a widespread belief. Let's take India, for example, right? One of those countries. Have you come across any research or any data that whether this reduces or somehow alleviates fear of death in those cultures?
That's interesting. The fear of death that's an interesting question. I thought you were going to go a different way. Let me hold on the fear of death question. I want to actually though give you this little bit because this does come up a lot, and it's not to say I get exactly what you're saying, but this is something that comes up oftentimes when we present the research. There are a number of cases. I'm looking up the paper now, this parent paper I was talking about earlier. I talk about it in this one. People will say, well, a lot of Ian's work, a lot of some of your cases, they're all from, like, let's say India, where belief in reincarnation is just it's rampant and everyone. I just think this is fascinating. I don't think people really understand this. So I'll start it by this. In 2021 or 2022, the Pew Research Center did a study in America asking Americans, do you believe in reincarnation, such that when a person dies, their consciousness comes back and lives in another body? And in America, just a few years ago, 33% of Americans said yes to that. In 2021, Pew Research Center did a study only in India, and they found that only 40% of India's Hindus say they believe in reincarnation. 27% of Indian Muslims believe in reincarnation. 18% of Indian Sikhs believe in reincarnation. So if you take that 40%, 27%, 18%, guess what? You're getting pretty close to the 33% of Americans who say they believe in reincarnation. So even in India, this place where we have this perception of like, oh, those people over there, they're all crazy. They believe in reincarnation. I mean, you can't even get above 40% in their culture of believing in it, despite the fact that it's actually, yes, it's embedded in some of their religion, cultural sort of beliefs differently than they might be here. But at a person, level, when asked, the best you can get is 40% in a particular version of their cosmology, but across the board, it seems to be closer to that third. So I think that's a really interesting fact, right? That like people just believe that like these other cultures think so much differently, and that's just classic psychology, where everyone's different from us when we're really quite similar. As far as fear of death, yes, now that's true. I would predict that fears of death. I don't know if I would predict again. I know I'm parsing words. I'm not sure about fear of death because, like I mentioned earlier, the sort of nuance of what that means, right? I bet there are Indians who fear pain of death and the pain of dying. I mean, right. So in the context of the broader issue of uncertainty and sort of what comes next and those kinds of questions, I bet they have a different way of confronting or thinking. Like there very well may be less denial. There may be very much more willingness to engage in it, right? I think that's what's happened in this modern Western world, these weird societies. We have so many resources. We have developed scientifically, medically. We have an abundance of resource, literally in the sense that like I could just pick up and move across the country and get a better job because there's better money there and leaving family behind. Whereas I think still in a lot of these other countries, people are more likely to stay closer to where their families are, which means they're more likely to actually be there when family members die, right? Like, I mean, I can't remember the last funeral or wake or anything like that. When I was a young kid growing up in New Jersey, surrounded by Italians, true Italians, like people who came here. I mean, we would go to the funeral, the wake. It was very Catholic. It was all, and there was a dead body. And as a kid, it was just like, oh my God. You just, what happened? You get the email today. Oh, your aunt, Sylvia died. Oh, I better send him a card. Right. It's like, I know I'm being a little bit blasé and a little bit generalization with this, but the modern Western world, not only are we living longer, so all that's true, and our health is better, but we don't see death the way it used to be seen, and I think is still sort of seen and dealt with in some of these other cultures. So that's the way I would frame it, is I think their psychology around it is different. I don't know that that immediately means fear of death is different because it's just too nuanced for me to be able to say that. I just think that they are much more likely to be surrounded by it than we are.
Interesting. But when we asked this question, Dr. Primalomo, about the NDE, the interesting thing is that he said that if in India somebody experienced NDE, he or she would be congratulated and would be accepted as a great experience and as a valid experience.
Well,
so
yeah.
I was surprised that you said, actually, if you look at the averages on fear of death or believe in reincarnation, maybe research is better. It's up, sort of level up with the Western world. That's what you're saying, basically.
That's reincarnation.
I expected something. Okay, that surprised me.
Yeah, but I think my point though is kind of, it does perhaps map onto what he's saying is I think because of the way they probably handle, approach, confront death there and are willing to, compared to how we are so in the West wanting to just do everything we can to push it away. I actually agree. I think that's kind of what I'm saying. I bet a near-death experience there would be like, oh, wow, right? Whereas near-death experiencers in America and the West, oftentimes they don't want to come forward. They don't want to tell their story because they're going to be seen just like someone, a mother with a past life memory kid. They're going to be seen as crazy. They're going to be seen as you're delusional that you think this is what's happened to you. So that's kind of what that's excellent. I'm glad he said it because that's sort of where I was leaning is that I bet that they're just handling it in a more open and honest way there. Now, again, that might predict reduced fear of death, but that I don't know because I think I'm going to lean into my fear of death definition as being too nuanced for me to just say that comfortably.
But I still would like to hear your hypothesis about reincarnation. What does it tell us about the nature of reality and consciousness? How
Yeah,
can we explain it?
I think I don't know. I don't know.
Good answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to start with that. I don't know. I think if you want me to speculate for a moment, I
Yes,
think
please do.
I will speculate. And let's just stipulate that I'm speculating.
Yes, yes.
I think when you take what DOPS and other DOPS-like places and institutions and researchers have done over the years, we tend to try to think like, all right, so I will be brief. We give talks regularly as a three of us or four of us sometimes will go. I'll do the past life memories. Marietta will do near-death experiences. Marina Weller will do out-of-body experiences. David Acunzo will do psi experiences, PK, these kinds of telepathy. And oftentimes at the Q&A, I will make the point to say, look, we've presented these things in these what appear to be these silos, but we don't really think of them that way, right? Like the near-death experience, the past life memory experience, the out-of-body experience, paranormal psychic experience. I'm going to take the belief that if, again, speculating, if consciousness is fundamental, if consciousness is this real life affirming, maybe life creating, maybe reality creating entity, and not the product of the mind and the brain, then it's probably all it makes no sense to me to say that it works very differently. What's happening near the experience is very different from what's happening in reincarnation, which is very different from what's happening in the out-of-body experience. What we're trying to do is figure out where the sort of the Venn diagram, the overlap of all of these, right? Because there will be something unique about a near-death experience. You had a cardiac arrest, you were under certain drugs, you had, right, et cetera. You had no oxygen. That's a real physical, biological, something's happening to the brain. It doesn't explain all of your near-death experience, but there are unique features to that that will be different from someone who just has a spontaneous out-of-body experience, right? That aren't having those hospital drugs, aren't having cardiac arrest. And it will be different from a kid who's remembering what we call the intermission period, the past life memory kids. Some of them actually can talk about where they were between lives. It's not just that I once lived as John Smith here and I came back as Bobby Jones here. I can actually tell you a little bit about that middle part. And what we're trying to figure out is how we can put those different areas on top of each other to figure out what are the core unique components of it. And the one thing that pops out to me that I always come to that makes me interested and excited about this notion, the speculation of consciousness being a thing, fundamental, and maybe who we actually are, right? That this physical reality that we're in is not necessarily who we truly are. There are two things. The first thing is that what happens is with out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, especially kids don't necessarily say this because if they're young, it's different. But what will come up a lot from near-death experiencers and even out-of-body experiencers is in some sense of referring to where they believe when they left their body, when they had that fully out-of-body experience, whether it was into heaven or just into another space, is a sense of feeling home, like a return to somewhere that is like where they really were supposed to be, are supposed to be. That's really compelling to me. But the other thing that's really compelling, this is true. Again, look at that overlap. Near-death experiencers, past life memory folks, and I think even some of the OBE, out-of-body experiences. There are a number of past life memory children who talk about that intermission period I was talking about, a large percentage of them will say, oh, well, I chose my mommy. I chose to become her child. Now, they'll say it in very different ways. Again, remember, these are 2 to 4 year olds. So, but when you take away the story they tell, sometimes it's almost like poetry. They'll say, like, I was one Marietta's favorite is someone I picked my mommy out of a basket full of mommies, right? It's like so but when you look at that, when forget the basket full of mommies, it's choice. It's I chose, right? That's what I'm looking at, the most high level. Like another kid told a story of beautiful. Like I said, it's almost poetry. He said, I followed my mommy to regularly to the watering hole until I decided I would become her baby. So I floated down on a speck of dust into her bucket of water so that when she drank me, I became her child. Right. Again, not what happened. Probably. It's a 3 year old. But again, what does it say? It's choice. I chose this person. Well, guess what? One of the things that you hear from near-death experiencers often is they'll say, it became clear to me, it became known to me that I had chosen the life that I'm currently living. That all of it, like that I knew, like in some sense, they had this awareness that this is what I was going to be experiencing, the life that I lived. So to me, that's remarkable because what it tells me in those two things that I've talked about is that people have this perception, this feeling, this experience that this is not real. This is not home, that somewhere else is actually where they're supposed to be or where they're from. And that consciousness seems to potentially, because OBEers say this too, have agency. Like consciousness is potentially fully autonomous. That's speculation that I'm leaning into, this notion that once, and that what's fascinating to me about that is that means that we get into this materialistic physical world of and we are confronted daily with real restrictions on autonomy. We don't get to do everything we want to do. We don't get all to make all the choices we want in life. And in fact, we debate as human beings, is free will a thing? Is there such a thing as true autonomy? The fact that we debated, me working at DOPS with this potential perspective of consciousness, this speculation, that's the reason we debate it. We're debating it because at some core level, we are purely autonomous, but we just are restricted. Our autonomy is physically, materialistically constrained in this world. And I think we struggle with that because we come from a pure home autonomous state into a world that constrains us and restricts us, and we have to make something out of that, and we have to reconcile that. So I don't know if that answered your question well, but that's what my hypothesis or my leaning is speculatively about consciousness. I think it's true. I think it's potentially home, potentially speculating, and I think it is potentially fully autonomous.
I don't know. I have a metaphor I like in mind. So it's like we are like waves on this vast ocean of, we can call consciousness, field of consciousness, fundamental, irreducible. You can't reduce it to anything else. And we constantly rising and falling. So we're dying and we are being reborn because that's the nature of consciousness. I mean, that's it. You know, there is not much more to that. Consciousness likes to dream, and we are the best dream of consciousness, I think. Because if consciousness is fundamental, there is no time space there as such.
Well,
Jung
of course
also
not.
used to say that. So if there is no time space, there is no experience.
Well, that's yeah, but all right. So there's so much. All right, so first of all, with the past life memory stuff, that's really interesting. We talk about this regularly. It's possible that when this meat suit dies and the consciousness that's animating it now moves on, it's very possible that it could reincarnate as a caveman. It could reincarnate thousands of years in the future as a spaceman, right? And all that's possible, and maybe even to a different dimension, a different reality, a different, universe. Which is interesting because people will always ask this, and it's why I think how many kids you could imagine if that's true that you just said timelessness, so reincarnate in the future. How many kids may have actually been born like recently who said to their mommy, mommy, I was killed once in a spacecraft. Well, how many parents would hear that and actually do what some parents do when their kids say, I died before in a car crash, and then take them seriously enough to start asking questions? A kid who says, I died in a spacecraft, the parents
And
are
that
more
happened.
right. And maybe it
Other
happened.
cases.
Right. No, and that's my point is they're not, because my guess is that most parents will are locked into the time sort of temporal way of thinking of time that we are now, and they would hear a kid say that and they would never process that as that's a past life memory because it makes no sense. My guess is they would say to the kid, "Oh, we watched Toy Story and you like Buzz Lightyear, the spaceman, so that's cute," or you're fascinated by astronauts. But it's totally possible that a kid has come back from the future and said, I have reincarnated after dying in the future. But because of the way we perceive time, nope. I mean, you can barely get a parent to take the kid seriously when they say, I died 20 years ago in war, to let alone have a parent really take that seriously. So we have zero cases of that. Now, does that mean I'm right? Maybe it's impossible. Maybe that's not the way it works. I'm just simply making the case that I just don't know that there's a parent out there that would hear a kid tell that story and say, aha, this is because I'm aware that consciousness exists outside of time, that my kid could have reincarnated from the future into today. It's like, that's way too much to ask, I think, of a parent. I think they're just going to be like, that's cute. Let's move on. We got to get you to soccer practice, right? They're just not going to be hearing it like that. Now, the other part I want to make very clear about was you mentioned earlier, in addition to that, I do have, again, speculative, and again, this isn't necessarily novel, but it's the way I've been thinking about it. I have a paper under review. Well, we just got submitted it's got nothing to do with what we've been talking about. It's all about large language models, AI, LLMs. And I have this general tendency to look at patterns and think of patterns as really important to pay attention to, right? And I view this as a pattern, which is if you took the smartest minds of humanity and said, come up with an all developing, always learning, always growing intelligence, how would you make that happen? Well, that's kind of what they did. And how did they, very crudely, in my sort of description of understanding a little bit about LLMs and AIA building and all this stuff, how did they do it? Well, they basically set up a situation where there's this center cluster of the intelligence, the AI, let's call it, and then they send out feelers into the world and they say, hey, can you do a bunch of humans? Can you do a bunch of stuff here? Answer questions for us, make distinguishing decisions so that it feeds back to the machine and it learns. And then it puts out another tentacle over here and it does this with a different, maybe this is art aesthetically, or maybe then it sends another tentacle over here and it looks for biased language. What do you think? This is the way they build these IAs and these AIs, and they have all these arms going out, these large language model processes where there's feedback, it learns, and then it sends out another one, and it keeps learning and growing. And to me, it feels like, isn't it interesting that the greatest minds of our generation are building an artificial intelligence that's all knowing and all learning? Maybe that's just them developing the best system of doing that because inherently at our core conscious level, we know that's exactly the way it's working. That there's this all knowing, all learning intelligence, consciousness, and it's sending us into the world right now, animating this computer, and it's taking all this information in, and it's experiencing, and it's learning, and it's growing, and it's feeling, and it's loving, and it's hurting, and it's painful, and it's learning, and then I die, and then it says, all right, send out another one because I need to keep learning and need to keep growing. So in a sense, I look at this new AI LLM way of building intelligence as maybe the pattern, maybe the way in which it's actually occurring, and maybe our role here is actually meaningful. And the reason I say that is interesting is the NDEers who come back and say, it was made clear to me that I had more work to do, that my work wasn't done. So again, now maybe that's meaning work, that they were supposed to help people or love people, but maybe part of that work is we still have more to learn from you. So go back. Your time isn't now because your role in this process isn't fulfilled yet. So that's maybe the most speculative theoretical conception that I have of consciousness, is that you and I right now are inputs. We're learning, we're experiencing, we're living, and the machine, the intelligence, the entity is like benefiting from that. And so is it all knowing? No, but it's all learning. It's constantly learning. It's constantly developing.
We are feedback loops, are we?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, in some sense, when I say that, it becomes sort of like, wow, we're just sort of pawns, right? We're just sort of like, we're like these worker bees going out there trying to do this work. But I think it's more than that. I think it's all for the benefit of consciousness. It's all like, I don't know. It's all so speculative, and I don't want to get outside or ahead of my skis or over my skis, as they say. I just feel like what we're doing here is meaningful. Why we're here is meaningful. I don't think it's chance. I don't think it's randomness. I think there's lots of randomness in the world, and there's randomness in this physical reality that we live in. But I actually do. I lean more toward the side of there's purpose here. There's there's a reason that we go through what we go through, that we experience what we go through, that we grow from it, that we learn from it. Um, and yeah, and the time is limited. And if reincarnation is real, it may not be, but if it is, it's sad because that means potentially Philip really does die, right? Like it's potentially means that like I die as Philip, but maybe I'll reincarnate as Jane, and Jane won't remember Philip. So does that mean Philip ever is? Maybe Philip really did live and die and disappeared. So I don't know what to make of that component of reincarnation, right? Like if reincarnation is real, it does actually like this notion of Philip just living in some afterlife forever seems like a strange thing because, well, shouldn't I be reincarnating if reincarnation is what we do? And if I do reincarnate, then how am I still Philip?
Yeah. I ask myself, and you in this case, could you handle psychologically the other side of things if Philip was eternal?
Right. I almost think that maybe that's weird too, right? This notion that like, so now I'm just Philip forever? Really? I couldn't do better than this? What if Jane's better? Maybe Jane is who I want to be.
No,
I'm
would you still find meaning after and thousands of whatever years or whatever
right.
time unit you
I
choose?
I
Millions,
think
maybe?
I think we do. You know why? Because again, speculatively speaking, I think it would be okay because I do think I'm Philip, right? I'm only processing, but once this consciousness leaves Philip, that consciousness potentially is, like we said, back home, surrounded by all knowing, all loving, a sense of I chose to be Philip, apparently, potentially, right? And maybe I'll be choosing to be Jane. And it's like, so there's a it's almost like again the speculation that I'm working with is that there's a longer game here. Like this is like we're not capable of understanding this truly knowing. I mean, there are people much smarter than I am, and I get that they have a better perception and heuristic of thinking about this. But I do lean more into the like we are like ants crawling around on the floor of a monument that explains everything, and we're just never going to be. I mean, I just think we can only process and think about the things that we're capable of processing, and we're grounded by our physical truths, our physical realities, who I am, myself, Philip, and what's actually potentially animating all this and the process that's underlying it all. It's 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 doing what it's supposed to do, and it's very happy with it. And what I care about, what I think about down here about it all, it doesn't give a shit about any of that. It really doesn't. It's just like it's doing its thing. And I'm hopeful in that speculation. I'm hopeful that I'm doing my part, that I'm living, that I'm learning, that I'm experiencing, that I'm trying to engage on this plane in this experience. I've had my highs, I've had my lows. I've tried to be a better human being through it all. Again, I say that like I know what that even means to be a better human being. But my point is I think that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be living. It circles back to the point we were making before, how this all connects to fear of death and fear of living and not engaging. Is that to me is you can take it to it's sad at the individual level. Maybe that's sad at the consciousness level because you're not actually doing the thing you're supposed to be doing, which is engaging, digging in, living it all, feeling it all.
If I were really to push it, I would say from that perspective, it's a great experience. Imagine for infinite consciousness, which is immortal. How can it experience mortality only by through
dying?
Right.
Dying
and people experiencing the fear of it.
I hope
the terror of it.
I said this a few months back to one of my colleagues. I said, consciousness. Let's talk consciousness for a second. Let's have this. I said, let's play this game. Remember, I said we have weird, cool jobs. So I said, consciousness, if that's what it is, it needs us to die because it can't. It's only in the dying that it's terror management theory. It's everything we were talking about earlier. It's my dying and my fear of dying that generates love and generates passion and generates a desire to create art and generates hate and generates humanity. So it's like this one way that I've started dealing with like this notion of that I'm a mortal being is just like, yeah, damn right I'm a mortal being. I have to be a mortal being. It needs me to die. Because being immortal, it can't have those experiences. Immortality prevents you from loving and crying and living and dying and pain and fear and joy. All of those things I truly believe are core components of us being mortal and knowing that we're going to be a dead being someday. So to me, that's fascinating that like consciousness potentially is so aware of itself that it knew it had to create a world of living and dying so that it could understand what truly living meant and that what humanness means. So we're dying mortal beings for a very good reason.
Yeah, and since science haven't found yet a way to find memories in the brain, we can safely assume that they're not necessarily in the brain. So therefore, it doesn't mean that they're lost, right? Or whatever experience that we go through in our lives, that it disappears when our physical body is gone. But you know what you said resonated, but also what Bernardo Kastrup was saying in Analytical Idealism. He says, I am not a person. He says, I'm what nature is doing.
I love it.
So, consciousness, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, exactly. I think once you kind of come to that perspective, I'm still precious about me. I still like, I feel a little, anxious today. What's happening here? Am I okay? It's like we're human beings. We're living on this planet. We have pain, we have fear, all that's real. But I do think I've slowly come to that perspective as well. It's just that's okay. It's okay. There's probably a longer game here. There's a deeper meaning to it. And I don't mean that in that kind of deeper meaning way. I just mean like I am fulfilling a purpose here. You are fulfilling a purpose here. Whether we know what that purpose is or not, whether I'm right or not, it doesn't really matter. It feels to me like I am much more comfortable saying I understand who Philip is, but I also understand that there's something much bigger than Philip and that this is a blip and who knows what comes and who I'll be next or where I'll be next. I much more likely than ever before in my life am convinced it's not nothingness. Circling back to my not waking up and never going back to sleep, as a college student, trying to understand what nothingness is, I've come to believe actually the opposite, which is that nothingness is impossible. Like I don't even think that's a thing. I've come full circle on that whole thing. Now, what it is, it's all fun to speculate, but I think nothingness is a ridiculous hypothesis. It's just a ridiculous hypothesis that nothingness is the answer. I mean, come on, not in a universe of so much and everything and unknowable everything and parts to it we still even understand. I mean, dark matter we don't even understand where we are, let alone what is reality. I mean, come on.
And for you, that's sort of this inner knowing, right? It's not something that you logically concluded to step 1, 2, 3, 4. No. Okay, that's okay. It's sort of just inner knowing. You don't need a proof for it. It's just there. It's like
Well, I think so. I think the NDE stuff, I think the past life memory stuff, I think the OBE stuff. I mean,
That
to
helps.
me, that's evidentiary sort of like
That's
guidance, right? Yeah,
confirmation, something
yeah.
that's
It's
confirmation of an inner feeling.
strongly suggestive of that's bolstering that inner belief. I've had a full out of body experience. I've had an incredible after death communication that was shared. It was verifiable and shared. Myself and my ex-wife had it at the exact same time.
Wow.
So even without those, I don't think you need to have those personal experiences of something spiritual, something transformative, a near-death experience. And I don't think you need them. That's my whole point. There's enough out there to already go that way. But having had a couple of those things in addition to all the evidence, yeah, I don't want to die tomorrow, but I'm good. I'm all right.
What advice would you give to students interested in researching or studying such unconventional, non-mainstream topics like what you are doing?
I think I'm going to take it the way I think every one of us at DOPS has done it. I'll say that it doesn't mean it's the only way to do it, but I think it is a good way to do it. All of us, the young new group there, myself, Marietta, Marina, David, we all worked in non-parapsychology and we got trained in non-parapsychology techniques and at institutions, like I said, good ones. And we worked, me longer than others. I was there for 20 years, some only for a few years. But I do think it's important to get training and experience working in a non-parapsychological system approach. Jumping straight in, again, I wouldn't say don't do it. I just think it's beneficial to actually be, even Ian Stevenson, even the person who's responsible for DOPS, had a career prior to his past life memory research that was just pure psychiatric research and doing mainstream work that he was doing. I think that's helpful. Once you develop skills, once you develop connections, once you train yourself to be a good scholar, a good researcher, a good scientist, then certainly, try and find a way to dip your toes. It's not to say that you might want to actually dip your toe into it. You may come not to like it. You may not. I mean, I taught for years, like I said, at the University of Essex, so I've supervised hundreds and hundreds of students, undergraduates and even graduate students. And I think it's important to make sure before you make that big of a step, like take a job in parapsychology, that you actually want the job, that you actually like the job, that you actually can do the job. So maybe volunteer, maybe find someone who's doing something, whatever country you're in. There are people in Brazil. There are people obviously here in Virginia. There are people, the Ryan Institute. There are people at IONS in California, right? There are people in the world doing different versions of this and different levels. See what you can do. See how you can help out. Dip your toe in it. Make sure it's right for you. Because once you go in, like all of us here, we kind of all know there may not be going back, right? Like, not that we want to. Not, I mean, every single one of us to a person loves the work and is honored and privileged to do it. But you leave a 20-year career in mainstream psychology to take the job at DOPS happily, knowing full well that once I start publishing papers, as I am now on past life memories and yada yada, that it becomes harder and harder to not be a parapsychology researcher, right? Even as my goal of hopefully reaching mainstream neuroscientific journals, et cetera, it's still going to be a challenge. So to a young person, I would say dip your toe in after proper training, get some experience in the mainstream literature and work, develop your skills, because some of what you're going to do as a parapsychologist, people will criticize it. People will look for mistakes. They'll look for bad processes. So you want to be well trained. Dip your toe in it. Make sure it's bringing you joy. Make sure it's motivating you and energizing you, and then do everything you can to create connections and to be a part of the community, whether that's conferences, the Parapsychological Association. You can join them. You can go to their conferences, the IANS, the Institute, International Association of Near-Death Studies. They have a conference every year. Go there, communicate with researchers, and see eventually if there are opportunities. For those watching this, I don't know if the timing will work. We're right now, for that project I just told you about, $750,000 grant project, we're hiring a 2-year postdoc to help us with that. So anyone who has a PhD in specifically best if it's cognitive developmental neuroscience kind of approaches. You can go to the UVA DOPS website and look for the job posting there. So there are opportunities that pay, but they're also very rare. So it is a privilege to have one of them. But again, just the best advice I would give is to make sure it's the right decision for you, because once you go down that road, it's a difficult one to turn around from.
Any more messages or statements or something worth mentioning at the end? Because we covered like the whole field back and forth.
I think it's important for me as a representative of the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, DOPS, just to make it clear that it's great fun to talk like we talked, and to speculate, and to be out there, and be allowed in this context to sort of think of all these kinds of possibilities. But also, it's really important. I really want to stress that we do take the work very seriously. We are, like I said, well-trained researchers and scientists, and we are not trying to prove something. Any researcher who says they're trying to prove something is not doing researchers justice. We are trying to ask difficult questions as interestingly and as creatively as we can. We're trying to work toward, yeah, we are working with a hypothesis that it is possible that consciousness is more than just created in the brain. It's fine to work with hypotheses. It's important to do it systematically and rigorously, and we really do that, despite what anyone might, any naysayer might actually want to believe. And we truly are open to all possible explanations for any of these phenomena. I will leave you with this. I will leave you with Dr. Ian Stevenson. This is the person who started all of this, really, not just at DOPS, but potentially even globally. In 1953, I believe, he wrote an article in Harper's Bazaar. And I found this quote a couple weeks back, and I started using it in some of my public talks. And I just think it's our approach at DOPS, but I also think it's just a really good way to think about the world and to be an active agent in the world. And he said this: to accomplish anything worthwhile in science and in nearly everything else, one has first to persuade oneself that things may be different from what they seem. And I think that's a wonderful quote, because it's sort of the whole point of what we do every day at DOPS is we are humble enough to know that we don't have all the answers and that we don't know the truth. And truth isn't something that you necessarily find via science, but it's something that guides you. It's something that motivates you. And we are taking that general approach, which is that things may not be what they seem.
Philip, thank you very much for your work and for this interview.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really a joy.